Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Peter Lacy, and Peter is a gentleman that I met years ago who is a bigwig at Accenture. He works on growth strategy, sustainability, and technology. He's a best-selling author, and he has a new book out called The Circular Economy Handbook. And, I'll never forget you, Peter, wearing that really cool vest that was made out of totally out of recycled soda pop bottles. And I love your message. I love that you've dedicated your life and your focus to this. I want to let people know, if you want to find Peter, you can find him on Twitter. So twitter.com/Peter Lacy, PETERLACY. You can get to his LinkedIn page from there. You can follow him on Accenture as well. And Peter definitely drops a lot of great knowledge bombs around all of those topics: growth, strategies, sustainability, technology, and my favorite, probably, the circular economy, which we'll have him talk a little bit about. But Peter, welcome to the show. Is there anything I missed that you would like people to know about who you are and what you're doing, or did I cover that all right?
No, that's great, John. Listen, great to be with you again. It's good to see old friends at times like these with COVID. It's nice that we've got these digital tools to do that. That was a good introduction, and thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm super thrilled. I could almost not sleep last night. I was so excited to talk to you. And one of the things that I have thought about is, imagine if this had happened 10 years ago. Yeah. We just didn't really have the infrastructure. I mean, we there was stuff there, but it wasn't so it would have been just so in some ways it's almost a blessing that it waited as long as it did, because I think people have been talking about this is coming sooner or later for a while.
I think that's right. I think it's clearly we would not have wished these circumstances collectively on ourselves, or for the terrible situation a number of people around the world are finding themselves, lost loved ones and so on. But it is always the case that you have to look for opportunity from adversity. And I think, it has been a phenomenal change in a very short period of time in the way that we interact with each other, whether or not, just at a human level, in our family, we now regularly have Zoom dinners, right? So, we have grandparents dial in for Zoom dinners, and, we regularly, everyone coordinates in the family, everyone works out. So we try and have a curry night, or we try and have a roast lunch, or whatever it is. And I think that's something that will endure. In the working world, I think what's interesting is that I don't think this is a short-term set of trends only that will then just revert back to the norm afterwards. I think we're talking about a working life that actually will be a much more hybrid, physical, digital experience for many more people than in the past. The example I would use in the work that I've seen at Accenture has been the National Health Service here in the UK. Typically in the past, my mother worked in the National Health Service for 50 years, so I've got a pretty up close and personal view of our health system here. Pretty technology resistant. Sometimes for good reason, right? Which is medical records and digitizing, privacy, security makes sense, but also just a bit,
resistant. And then there's those companies that create the thing and get it approved, and it costs a lot of money. It costs 10 times as much because it's approved than what it probably really should.
Processes. But this is the incredible story, John, which is in a 2-week period with Accenture and the NHS working together, put 1.2 million doctors, nurses, and service staff on Teams, Microsoft Teams, in a 2-week period, that would normally take I think this links into leadership comms, right?
Of
But
course.
that would normally take a change process of 5 years, and you would have got an adoption rate of maybe 50, 60%. In a 2 week,
Yeah.
we've got an 80% adoption rate across it. And that won't change. That will
Yeah.
maybe it'll go down when you have physical and digital in terms of the overall aggregate use. But you've got 80% of the NHS now is online, is digitally communicating using Teams, and that is the new normal. The
Yeah.
incredible intensity of periods of change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because I remember when this whole thing really hit. I've been, I coach people in China and in Japan and in
Yeah.
Europe and things. And so
And
I was
you're the only coach I've ever had who I enjoy seeing your dog as much as I enjoy seeing you. Wherever
I'm going to take that as a compliment.
it's a compliment. I don't know if your listeners know that you've got a sidekick that comes along.
Yeah.
Go.
Yes, that's Flash. And right now he's upstairs in bed. He's 16 and a half. So he definitely is moving a lot slower and everything, but he's still doing well. Just
I
had his,
feel him. I feel like that too, right? But Flash is the only, as far as I'm aware, is the only canine coach we've ever let into Accenture's campus in St Charles.
I think you're right. I think you could be right. I think you could be right. Can I tell you a secret? He's the only canine that ever sat in the mission controller's chair at the NASA installation in
Oh, very
Houston
cool.
where they put men on the moon, right?
This is your backdrop, right?
Yeah, well, this is the space that, Peter, the NASA decided I'm a high value asset. So they brought me up here to ride this whole thing out, Uh,
Very
But when we visited NASA, when we were there, one of the times that I worked with NASA, we got the rock star tour of the Houston,
yeah,
they said, look, we got to put Flash in the mission controller's chair and get a picture. So we did.
very
Let's see if I can find it. I'll send it to you.
fun. Send it to me.
But and anyway, what I was going to say was maybe not that important because I forgot it. But uh, I do. Oh, I thought the horizon was June, I mean, and here in the States, we had the PPP and everybody was kind of angling towards make it to June. I don't know what anybody was thinking, including me. June's over. It's July when we're talking right now, July 2020. And I think that this is something that's going to be with us longer than any of us want it to be.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're saying is really important. This impacts leadership communications in a huge way because number one, digital has just been given a massive boost.
Yeah.
I think that I heard of an article that was saying that we're at online shopping penetration that we weren't expecting till 2025 and it's 2020, not even barely in, And
Yeah.
so what do you think that going digital like this and being distributed and being in this virtual environment, what are some of the things you're seeing about leadership and how this changes and or doesn't change aspects of being a powerful leader?
I think it's a really good question. I think so. I'll answer it in three different parts. So I think there are eternal themes of leadership which, frankly, don't change with the medium, don't change with they don't even change with the times, right? I think there are some underlying, components of leadership which, frankly, the ancient Greeks were writing about, and that
Yes,
still
absolutely.
count, right?
Yes.
Authenticity, consistency, clarity. I think all of those sorts of themes. I do think so. That's the first thing. Is I think there are plenty of elements of leadership that remain the same. I think the second thing, though, is that you now need to, as a leader, there's a short term and a long term set of issues. The short term is that as a result of the pandemic, as a result of I think the uncertainty that it's created amongst not just your own people, your teams, your pyramids, but also all the other interactions you have with suppliers, with customers. There is a huge amount of uncertainty, and on the one hand, there's a commercial uncertainty, but there's been an existential uncertainty. People are living in a very unclear and quite frightening world, and have gone through dramatic change in terms of the way that they work. People are worried about their futures. People are worried about their family. And I think as a leader, you have to make sure you've got that tone right. You really try and help to be flexible, to be human, to relate to the challenges that we all face. I think, just little things like checking in with people, to your point about leadership communications, not making it a broadcast conversation with you trying to kind of constantly get your message across and to revert to the business first, but actually having human connections in some of these interactions, one-to-ones, groups, etc. I will often start off with asking people how they're doing, how their family are doing, how they're and
that's really good.
That isn't something that I think maybe we didn't do it enough in the past. Maybe we should have been doing it anyway, right? But I think now it's even more important because of the tone and because of the importance of that uncertainty. I think, but the other thing I would say is that, and still sticking with the second point, I think the longer term implication of this is this is the new normal. We're never going back. This is never normal, right? So this is going to be a hybrid set of channels and mediums that you're going to have to navigate as a leader, and you should not assume that digital is the same as physical, just mapped onto the virtual space. And that is true at the individual level. You've got to be thinking about your own skills, your knowledge, your mindset in terms of the way you're communicating with these digital channels. I'll give you an example of why that doesn't work. I've seen personally some of the big global network organizations, some of whom have done a very good job in COVID in communicating, some of whom have not. And the ones who have not have been those who've mapped the offline format to the online format and just assumed that you can just plug and play. And actually in conferences, for example, if you have the classic moderated conference, it's very static in an online world when everyone's used to interacting and when everyone's used to a more distributed model of communication rather than the more pedagogic, pupil and teacher or sort of leader and audience. And it doesn't work. It doesn't translate because we're not used to that same that model. And I think so you've got to be very careful to not assume that the old world just maps digitally. You have to be more creative, more proactive, more distributed, more innovative. So I think those are the leaders that will win on the leadership communications on that front. I think then the third piece for me is, and if you're interested, if anyone's interested in following up on it, if you have a look at the responsible leadership program that myself and our CHRO, Ellen Shook, have been driving at the World Economic Forum, with a group of business leaders there, but most importantly with a group in the World Economic Forum, one group called the Young Leaders Group, which are mostly 30s and 40s, and then one group called the Global Shapers at the WEF, which are more in their 20s, and about 5,500 of those around the world in different cities, mapping out the future of responsible leadership. And, I think the communications element is a very important part of that as part of an integrated whole that basically says the next decade, while some of those eternal lessons of leadership still count, there are some new things that we need around empathy, around technology quotient. So you actually need to understand what Julie Sweet, our CEO, calls TQ, right? Which is what is it that technology allows me to do differently in my role in my business, and as well as sustainability and thinking through responsible business, sustainable business themes. There are knowledge, skills, attitudes, mindsets, very specifically that we're going to need to develop as this next generation of leaders, to be able to navigate that, of which leadership comms is one in this digitized hybrid world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. What have you seen, Peter, just as kind of a dive into one of the things that you just said? What have you seen that does work in terms of, when you see these things where a moderator and it's just like, map physical mapped on. What have you seen that have been like just an idea or two for our listeners that are more creative, better ways to do that kind of stuff?
Well, I think, for example, if you look at a tool like Microsoft Teams, but you could say Google Hangouts, you could say, there's, whichever one you want to pick, WebEx, etc. I think, the functionality is to have multiple rooms.
Yeah.
Rather than to just simply have that one idea of centralized broadcast feature, right?
Yeah.
But to be able to then have distributed conversations where you have more opportunities to interact with smaller groups and then to come back.
Yeah.
I think what you also see is that there are many things like wiki functions, on those tools that allow you also even to get into more concrete co-creation of content, whilst you're actually in that that sort of digital conference setting. I think I think a little bit is about the technology quotient, rather than simply assuming that it's just about a digital trying to find a tool that allows you to replicate your offline to online, actually looking at the technology possibilities and thinking about how to be innovative and creative to create a much more broader, more extensive, richer dialogue. That I have seen, and I've seen our teams are doing it. Funnily enough, the junior teams, it's the second nature, because a lot of them have been grad school. Anyway, it's the dinosaurs like me and others that sort of have to kind of catch up. But I think that's maybe another learning, is actually to invert the pyramid. And to give
there you go,
the digital natives.
That's great. I mean, it makes me think about artists. You wouldn't paint with oil colors the way you paint with watercolors, right? You got to take your medium into account in what the end product's going to be and how you do it, right?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. That we have. I mean, we've moved from water to from watercolors to oil to digital colors. That's right. Knowing how to use that canvas and use that palette in new ways is exactly right.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And then I do think that another thing that I'm feeling is this rise of the importance of empathy. And I've been saying in a lot of the webinars that I've been doing for companies around going virtual and digital and being distributed, that the old command and control, that's just not, I mean, number one, I don't think that ever worked as well as authentic, empathetic, connected leadership. But when you go to a distributed environment, the minute people close that window and are not on the call anymore or whatever, you don't have any control over what they're doing. And I actually have a friend who is working with a company, and they wanted to have all their employees open up like a Zoom window and aim the camera at themselves as they worked all day, so the boss could come in and see that everybody was sitting there diligently working.
What they haven't realized is that you can just press Control Function and just copy your picture onto there whilst you're sat there going and playing golf, right?
Right.
So the workaround. I mean, look, the empathy thing, I think, is right. I do think that, and that was a little bit my point about changing up the style and the tone, so you're really checking in with people. One of the most beautiful things about the COVID crisis, in that sense, to the extent that there are silver linings, has been the normalization of being in people's homes, right? And it's the fun. One of my friend's wives is a journalist for Sky in the UK. She's had a bit of a meme on Twitter this week, because my friend's son, I'm sure we've seen this in different parts of the world, but interrupted her very important high-level chief foreign correspondent interview and came in and asked whether he could have 2 biscuits repeatedly, and was allowed the loudest 2 biscuits. Although I've said to my friend that I think he could go higher next time. I think 5+ biscuits just to get off the screen.
That's so funny.
But the point is that it's humanized people's working life and private life. And
Yeah.
you've got to be careful you don't transgress boundaries that people don't want, transgressed. But at the
Right.
same time, I think it's an artificial division anyway, right? This idea
I
that
totally agree.
that we take off one hat and put on one hat, and I think that allows you to be more authentic and connect more authentically because that is a more honest reality. And I think that I've enjoyed that element actually.
Yeah. Peter, I'm asking people a lot, not only to think about what they're getting out of this experience that they want to have be long term,
Yeah, it's a good question.
but also to write it down
Yeah.
and to be really stay present to it, because some of the people that I'm coaching in China are saying that as they've basically gone back,
Yep.
he was saying, I think that people are starting to forget how much they wanted to keep working from home and how much they wanted to not travel unless they really needed to travel.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a danger of that. And I think that there are a lot of things that in my one-on-one sessions with people, especially come up of just, gosh, John, this what you just said, Peter, this whole humanizing of things
Yeah.
and being more real at
Yeah.
work. And, I hope that never goes away. And I say, well, look, don't let it go away because it's up to us.
The conscious choice. I totally agree with that, John. And I think your idea of writing it down is a very smart one. I think that authentic, humanized, connected personality, kind of dynamic. I think that people are not one person at home and one person at work has more profound, longer term implications, because I think there is an extent to which sometimes some of the more negative elements of capitalism, of organizations, of even the way that we structure our societies are actually because of that idea of that somehow we have different identities. We don't. We're one human, right? If you well, look, with my investment portfolio, I invest in fossil fuels because it's greater returns. With my work, I focus on sustainability. You can't really say that. I mean, that's not.
Yeah.
And I think people do hanker after that consistency of what I think, what I say, and what I do are the same thing. And I think I hope and I think that is a trigger or a supporting mechanism for some of the things that we're seeing happen, and that it stays with us. I think the other thing, John, that I hope it stays with us, and I think is extremely important. At the moment, not just because of COVID, but in part because of COVID. But I think more generally, what we're seeing certainly seeing it in the US, we're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in Brazil, who've been hardest hit by the COVID situation. And there's no doubt whatsoever in my mind that there is a causation, not just a correlation, between the nature of populist politics that's emerging in each of those countries and the fact they have a real difficulty with science and facts and right. But
it's got me worried, Peter.
Well, I think we should all be worried, healthily and worried. I mean, it's but I think the other thing that I hope stays in this is, you've talked about this before, you and I have talked about it. I think trust and transparency, and being able to communicate openly and honestly about what we know, what we don't know, and I think that in a world where we have so many, so much challenge in understanding the signal from the noise in terms of social media, in terms of the sort of the messages that are out there, we're kind of almost in a post-truth society.
Yeah.
So I think that ability to be honest and open and trusted and to be transparent, even sharing things that you might be uncomfortable sharing about what you don't know, and being comfortable with that, and being comfortable with uncertainty as well as explaining uncertainty. I think that is a massive, massive thing that I hope does stay, and that people don't revert back to that more command control idea of a sort of hero leader that knows everything, knows the direction, knows where we're headed, and with no uncertainties.
Yeah, the initials for that are B and S.
Right, exactly right. Because in a world that is as uncertain and complex as it is, anyone who tells you that they have the answers, I don't think it's the same era we were in before, where people maybe were prepared to follow hero leaders. I don't
Yeah.
think
No,
people follow hero leaders at all now. I
no.
think,
I think a lot of those people died in World War One.
well, I think
Yeah,
I would like to say that was true, but I think there's plenty of folks that style has made its way well into the 21st century.
for sure. Way too far. Way too far. Well, and Peter, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it definitely comes down, I think, maybe on second thought around, to leadership communications. But I'd love to hear your whatever comes up for you when I say what I'm about to say. So, first of all, the news media, especially in the United States, I think BBC gets away from this. It's why I watch and pay attention to BBC so much. But in America, we've got basically the CNN Fox axis,
Yeah.
which the only thing that they really get paid for is the most sensational, divisive clickbait.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's that. Then you go to social media and it gets even worse because they have now actually created very powerful artificial intelligence, which figured out that the way it gets us to stay on their site, which is what they want, is to divide us. So we have very powerfully programmed artificial intelligence that's using the cutting edge technology that we have in digital to separate us. And then we've got foreign actors like North Korea and Iran and Russia and China that for the past at least 10 years have been doing everything they can to consciously divide us using those same mediums in pairing up with the AI algorithms. So, what do we do here? Because I think that the UK is suffering this as well, especially in the social media realm. And it's, this is not, I don't think it's a healthy combination of communication.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, in the UK is not exempt from that. I mean, I think even if you go back to the sort of Cambridge Analytica scandals,
Yeah.
elections, I do think it's more extreme in the US, but actually, typically, what happens in the UK actually is that we're probably 2 or 3 years behind you in most trends, and they catch up in the UK in many ways. So, I think if you want to see the UK's future, I think it is a case to some extent of looking at some of those trends. I look so what you asked? What are the thoughts that emerge? I think there is a growing backlash, in my view, that I don't know that we are there yet, but it strikes me as though there is a growing backlash in the middle, right, of people who really don't feel comfortable with that level of polarization. And it's almost
me for one.
and I think it's, but that's true in all reasonable educated populations, right? We go through phases where we have massive polarization and division, but actually there's the 80% in the middle, not the 10% in one extreme and 10% in the other extreme, that don't actually over any longer period of time feel comfortable with that. And I think you're seeing that in the US being recognized, for example, in the discussions that are going on between Facebook and the advertisers, that actually the advertisers, calling out Facebook on some of the moderation and and I think that is also, these are not saying that these are not companies that are all about values. There are some very good companies in there with some very good values, but it isn't. There's a commercial imperative in there in that concept.
Yeah.
I think these are big brands, consumer brands, who recognize that it's beginning to become something that's tiring out the middle, and that they want a different alternative, and they don't want that polarization. They do want some level of fact. They do want organizations that can help them sort out lies from fact. Or at least to be open and transparent about it. So I am not. I don't believe this is permanent. I do believe these are waves. That's the first part of the answer, and I think
which is good.
I think we may be getting to some of that point, and COVID may have made that even more the case, right?
Yeah.
I think the second thing is, and Black Lives Matter, I think, is another element of that as well in
Mm.
the US. I think the second element of this is that, and we see this in our business, and our Chief Technology Officer, Paul Doherty, who's now our CEO of our technology business, will talk about this at length. The technology for good, and putting the boundaries, the ethical and values and principle based boundaries around technology like artificial intelligence is unbelievably important. And
Unbelievably important.
and it is
Totally
not,
agree.
and there isn't yet the universal sets of standards applied to that we need. In most advanced economies around the world, the analogy I would use is health and safety, right? That we have health and safety standards that are non-negotiable. They are regulated. They are, they are applied to every workplace
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
every public space. And yet we have this digital space, both in the workplace and at home, that is like the Wild West, right?
Yeah.
That just simply does not have those guardrails, and that we haven't really even had the proper discussion in society what we accept and what we don't accept. But technology is neutral, right? And so you can apply it to bad or good outcomes.
Yes.
And I just don't think we've had the mature society-wide debate about what we want from technology. And guess what? If you don't do that, then you will see as many malevolent as benevolent forces, using that technology to their own ends.
Right.
So
Right.
that's a real call for action, that we really do
Yes.
help. And then to your themes, which are always about leadership and communications, I think there is a premium. I know there is a premium for leaders who are prepared to move ahead of the curve on that and to set their own standards and to do what's right and to anticipate, as the companies we just talked about in the conversation
Yes.
platforms are doing, and move ahead of that. I think there is a premium for that, and I think it plays out with consumers, it plays out with your employees, it can play out with business partners, and I think I think that's something that we as leaders have to stand up and be counted for.
Yeah. That's awesome, and thank you. And I'm happy to hear someone in your position say these things. And I know that you are getting up in the morning and doing things every day to make that stuff happen. So, I don't want to miss the chance. I know that we've got about 15 minutes left before you've got a hard stop,
Yep.
to hear a little bit about the circular economy handbook and your passion about the circular economy. And I wonder if it would be, if it's something that's still fresh enough in your mind that you could share that the
Yeah.
story that we worked on, and that I got to see you in that.
That's right. Yeah, you were very much part of it, and you helped me shape the narrative that I did use again and again after that. With
That makes me so glad. That makes me so
with
glad to think I had a little piece
no,
to do with you
you did my
spreading this.
sharpen my TED Talk version in our practice exercise. I mean, look, the so we've been talking about COVID and the impacts that it's had, which is, I think for many of us has been all consuming for the last few months, rightly so. And I think what's important to not lose sight of is the fact that will pass. Now, it may be in the next few years that we're still in a very similar mode, and I can see other similar analogies in the next decade emerging, so that we're going to have we haven't going to have a never normal, component.
Yeah, right. Never normal. That's actually, I think that's better than the new normal. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
never normal, right? I think we might have coined something here.
I think that is it. I think it's never normal, and I think, but what I think is important not to lose sight of is, if you take a step back, the bigger challenges for the longer term are about sustainable development. They are
Yes.
about, I mean, I think they're threefold, actually. I think the first and biggest challenge that we have, is that the system of governance and capitalism and globalization that we are currently working through is fragile and producing unhealthy outcomes for the many, right?
Yes. Yes.
Great outcomes for the few, but
Yeah,
not
very few.
very few, a very polarized, wealth distribution.
Yeah,
And I think for all sorts of reasons, that is the underlying reason that we're seeing some of this populism. We're seeing
I totally agree.
40 years in the US and the UK of people's incomes not rising,
Yeah,
and you're seeing generations being left behind at the margins of work,
yeah,
and serial poverty through generations in families, in cities and towns. So there are various reasons why we actually really, as leaders, business and government, needs to step up and rethink that model, or it will be something that that runs away from us, and we don't have control of actually benevolently shaping that. So that's the first thing is we've got to be focused on. I think the second thing is we've talked a lot about the fourth industrial revolution and digital revolution and so on. And first of all, it's not true. It hasn't happened. What I mean by that is that an industrial revolution changes the basis of production and consumption in an economy, and materially changes and uplifts the growth of that economy. And we just haven't seen that. If you look at the last decade, you just can't say that. It's not there in the numbers. Now, neither is it there in terms of the benefit to society. What you see is that actually there are some players, the platform players, the software players, that have been very, very successful. The rest of companies less so. What we see is some parts of society that have been huge breakthroughs, but not necessarily in ways that raise the standard of living for everybody. And so the next decade for me is about making that a reality, because it is possible, and the
yeah,
potential of those technologies is there. So the combination of digital, physical, biological technologies, where we've had enormous scientific breakthroughs applied in the right ways, that it is possible, that fourth industrial revolution, and it's possible that it is an extraordinarily positive set of outcomes for humanity, but it hasn't happened.
yeah,
And then the third piece for me is that all has to take place within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations set out for the world, and 193 countries signed up to, as well as most of the businesses. And part of it's about climate change and the focus on the
yep,
Paris Summit. But it isn't just about that. The SDGs really focuses on the whole gamut that we need to create a sustainable world
yeah,
2030.
yeah,
And we are, other than maternal health, we are missing every single one of those targets. Every single one
mm,
goes starting
mm,
this after 3 or 4 years. And so, we've got, those are the three challenges that, COVID has shone a light on many of the themes and issues, but
yeah,
that will go away. Those three will not go away. And
yeah.
so, coming back to the point, I think the circular economy is one very important contribution that.
So say something about, just give us a quick explanation for anybody that doesn't know
Yeah,
what we're talking about, because it was new to me.
yeah, yeah. No, so circular economy as a concept is the idea that we need to fundamentally shift the relationship between our economy and the use of scarce and harmful natural resources to the environment. Right. And so the best way to think about it is almost a decoupling of all the things we want from economic development, from growth, from jobs, from wealth creation, which is what, when capitalism and markets work well, that's what it does, right? And
Yeah,
enterprise works well. But we want to do that by decoupling it from deforestation, from fossil fuels that are driving carbon into the atmosphere, from plastics that are polluting the ocean. And it's not to say that we don't want all those things, or you can have less of them, but we've got to find ways, innovative ways, using new business models, using new technologies, to make sure that we eliminate that scarce and harmful natural resource use, which is embedded in our economies. Now, in the
yeah,
old world, we had a linear economy: take, make, waste. Right?
yeah. Take, make, waste.
Not far off, right? Take, make, waste. What we need is a circular economy that allows us to reuse, to recycle, to recover, to keep those resources in our system. So it's take, make,
Yep.
take, make, take, make, take, make, take, make, take, make. Right?
Yeah.
So you're avoiding that damage that we're doing to the environment. The honest truth is, John, that putting it at its most simple, we are on course by 2050 to use 3 times the natural resources that our planet can take.
Yeah.
We're already at 1.4. In the US, you guys are already at 3, right? And
Yeah.
the whole world is going to be. So it's the equivalent of, like, if you think about your 401k, right, it's the equivalent of living off of the capital, not the interest. Right? We are,
Right.
as a planet, as a species, we
Yeah.
are drawing down on resources that cannot be replenished and that cannot be replaced, and we're basically using the Earth's capital instead of the interest, and we've got to get
Yeah.
back to a model that does that. Now, then,
That's a great way to say it.
yeah, and it's, look, what I've focused on and what I've spent my time, with the last decade, is how to help companies do that, not just governments and societies, but how do you come up with the products, the services, the innovative processes, the ways of going about that journey that allow people to have the products and services that they want and they need, but to remove those scarce and harmful natural resource use components and come up with others. So moving from non-biodegradable to biodegradable plastics, moving from fossil fuel-based energies to renewable energies, moving from water-intensive crops to crops that we can make sure that we're not creating droughts and water scarcity problems. And these are the things you don't see as a consumer or a customer, but because of new technologies, are becoming increasingly transparent to people. So that's really what we're doing, and we're finding that companies are able to create some real competitive advantage increasingly by doing the circular economy in the right way.
I would imagine. So and that event that I keep thinking about, tell us about the jacket you had on, the
Oh
vest.
yeah. That's a good example, and ties so many of those things together. That jacket, which is I don't know what you would call them in the States. We call them body warmers. Like in France, they call
Yeah, it's a vest, I think,
yeah.
right? Like no sleeves, but a nice core warmer, beautiful black, nice.
Yeah, very cool. And it's I forget the rapper that is this.
Was it Will I Am?
I think it was will.i.am. That's it. That's will.i.am's label, and it was with a partnership he had with Coca-Cola, which was 100% of the jacket's material is from, as you say, carbonated drinks. So the
Yeah.
zipper, all aluminium cans. The actual fabric itself is all PET bottles. So the kind of bottles you get your Coca-Cola and the like
Yeah.
in. And it just showed for me how, a number of things, the technical possibility that we have to do it, right? So we don't have to use cotton and raw materials, virgin raw materials. We can actually recover and recycle the materials. But the other thing it shows to me as well, and this is where I'm been a pioneer in some of these places, is that, when we sometimes think about recycled materials, we have almost a negative attachment connotation to the idea, well, it's reused, it's somehow dirty, it's not as clean, or not as aspirational. Whereas actually what
Yes.
we're going with this is a super aspirational product, and it's actually higher value because it's recovered and recycled than if it was
Yeah.
not, because it's innovative, it's different, it's on message, on trend, etc. So I use that, as long as it's not too hot, because doing a TED talk in a
Yeah,
body,
TED Talk in a vest.
as
I
long as
think
it's
you
not
took
too
it
hot,
off after a
so
while.
I try and use it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's fabulous. So, is there anything else in the couple minutes that we have left that you would, want to say, or anything that goes through your mind as we're kind of winding this down?
Well, I think the key to me is that, given this is about leadership and communications, and communications for a purpose, which is to achieve positive outcomes, right, for individuals, for organisations, for society. I think it is keeping our eye on the prize, that successful organisations in failing societies are a waste of time, right?
Well said.
And that's our real leadership mission, I think, is that for this generation of leaders who are approaching, levels of power within their organizations and levels of influence and responsibility, and this next generation of leaders, we've got a lot to fix. And this decade ahead is the key decade when we have to fix that. And I think that means fixing capitalism. I think that means delivering on the potential of technologies and breakthrough technologies. I think that means doing that with sustainability, not as an add-on, but absolutely intrinsic and at the heart of what we're doing in our organizations. I don't think it's neither realistic nor appropriate, in my view, for us to leave this to others. As business
Yeah.
leaders, you can't point at governments, right? We've been doing that for too
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
We've got step up, and we've got to be counted, and we've got to not wait for other people to set rules and regulations. We have to find ways of making it commercially advantageous, or at least commercially neutral, by doing the right thing for people, for the economy. And that's what's required in this next decade. And there's nowhere to hide, right? I mean, even if you wanted to hide, but there's nowhere to hide. And so, I think, and the ability to communicate in that context is unbelievably important, which is why you focus on. I think the ability, this need for empathy, this need for more human-centric thinking around communications, the need for to really be transparent and open about the levels of uncertainty that we face, while still creating a coherent vision and narrative for organizations that can move people forward. And most of all, what will matter in this next decade, given the uncertainty, given the destabilization, given the ongoing challenges that we have in terms of media and information and communications, will be trust. And, I think communication is a critical component of your ability as a leader to build trust with your teams, with your suppliers, with your ecosystem, with your customers, and getting that right in a hybrid world and in a complicated and complex world will continue to be something that we all have to work on.
Yeah, I well said. Here. And so, Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot because I want to ask you if you will come back sometime, like, I don't know, in the next 6 months or whatever. And I would love to have you think about some of the leaders that made an impact for you and some of the stories that they told, and come back and tell us a few stories about your growth and development as a leader and who you learned from and what you learned. Would you be willing to do that sooner or later?
Yeah, be happy to, John. Absolutely.
I would love to do that. And it's just, I do just want to say again, I always remind people that leadership and anything that gets you noticed by the group is dangerous. Look what happened to Jesus and Joan of Arc and Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy and, Socrates. And you are a leader on a global scale. So that's globally dangerous, and I think that it is always an act of courage and generosity to step into a role like that when you are focused on something that is bigger than yourself. And I know that's who you are. And I know that you are making a difference on an ongoing daily basis, probably mostly even on the weekends too, around making what we talked about here happen and bringing us into a sustainable future where we can thrive. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you on behalf of all the people who have no idea what you're up to and how hard you're working. And I also just want to thank you on my own behalf. So appreciate you taking time out from that to talk with us here. And I'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, John. And it sounds like I have to be careful to avoid the guillotine or hemlock. But apart from that, I'll keep.
You're right on. Yes. Well, yeah. Hopefully, it's not quite as dangerous as it used to be. But
thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
You're super welcome. And thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.